And this brings me to the next problem, is that we have what I would call a weaponization of cognitive dissonance. Follow the science. Follow the science. Who wouldn't want to follow the science? But what I just showed you there, that is science. That's how science actually really works. People do papers, they make experiments, and we try to advance our level of understanding, and we have a lot. So what I feel is happening, especially amongst the academic left, is they, in a sense, have been captured, but unconsciously. The working class has seen their position in society degrade. Money flows from everybody to the now super rich. During COVID, there was one new billionaire created every day for nearly 2 years. And I mean, hey, that would only be 600 billion. 9 trillion was spent. The whole thing is estimated to have cost 20 trillion. Where do you think all that money went? It went somewhere. And now there are private equity institutions seeking to buy up half the province of Saskatchewan because they want to trade that cash for assets. And they seem to be working somewhat in concert with each other. They're not going to drive up inflation too quickly, but they all see it coming. When you dump that much money into an economy, when you print that much money, inflation is the result. Money is not wealth. It's just a means of exchange. And if the supply is not constrained, then inflation is the result. That's a basic economic principle. Supply and demand. If everybody has $1 billion, then everybody could afford to pay a few million for a loaf of bread. It starts to become meaningless. You know, you can't just print money and make everybody a billionaire. That's not how it works. Unfortunately, we have to produce goods and services that have exchange value, and then money just facilitates that exchange. So one of the primary roles of government is to constrain money supply, but there's always a temptation to finance things. So we are now in a situation where just about everybody is in debt, except a very small class of people. Wealth inequality is fueling crime. It's fueling homelessness, desperation. And I think that $20 trillion might have been better spent preparing for the future. But the super rich seem to have inadvertently or deliberately hatched a plan, which is that we'll just let humanity die of poverty and desperation, and thereby solve the problem. And I guess that is one way. But I challenge those who meditate, who try to see clearly. So I called this the weaponization of cognitive dissonance. How could well-paid academic experts mislead us? But the thing is, there was a doctor here in Saskatchewan who was fired, Dr. Christian, I think his last name was Anderson, I'm sorry, but Marianne Cloak, a well-respected prairie-born CBC reporter for over 30 years, was fired. Countless others, thousands of healthcare workers were fired. The threat was clear. If you don't get on board with the message, then you might lose your job. There's a doctor in Regina who prescribed the infamous Nobel Prize winning drug ivermectin, which is very similar to artemisinin, but artemisinin is considered a natural health product at the present time, so that you don't even need a prescription, although in order for it to be pharmacologically active, it does need to be altered in its most basic form. It's not really absorbed well. But there have been discoveries that have shown how you can enhance that without using exotic chemical methods. That said, we need research that's funded like the stuff I was just looking at here, which is for the good of people and not just for pension fund profits. I'm Darren Gall for FutureProof.Health. I'm Darren Gall for The Sheeple Look Up. Now, and the next thing that I would say is The working class is often looked down upon, and they become disenfranchised, but they are not necessarily the disillusioned. I would say that, amongst, street smart, they call it, it's like the working people, truck drivers, carpenters, plumbers, they were much more suspicious of the message because they have kind of developed a hack. Maybe they're not privy to the goings on at universities. They don't really understand that culture. But what they have learned to rely upon is trust. Trust being so important. And so if someone is not presenting themselves honestly, there might be reasons why they wouldn't. Maybe someone's very sad because they've been through a terrible divorce and they're trying to put on a happy face, which is a lot of people. That's a different kind of lying, but there's a kind of lying where it's manipulative and trying to get money out of your pocket. And when people look at Fauci, they just knew that something wasn't adding up with this guy. And why are we trusting him? And, when Rachel Walensky kind of broke the script, saying maybe we overreacted, she was fired, or resigned, actually, sorry. And many people at the CDC resigned on the booster policy because there was no need to get a booster if everybody in the country had just recently had COVID and gotten over it. There was no logical reason, except if you wanted to transfer wealth, the last remaining trillions of public wealth into private hands, by convincing people that if they didn't get the booster, they might die, or they would be breaking their pact with society. Because 97% of doctors said, but did they really? And where does that stat even come from? I heard that said, I don't know. But it's probably relatively true, because if you didn't get on board with the message, you would be fired. So the average person says, if you're holding a gun to someone's head, in a sense, saying you won't be able to feed your family, you'll have to default on your mortgage, lose your status in society. There's very few people who are willing to do that. But even under those circumstances, there were those who did. Byron Bridle in Canada at the University of Guelph was demonized. And what we did to that man was tragic. And then there's this character assassination. So even highly accomplished developers of this technology, whose names you can't even mention without the disgust response being triggered, they were essentially assassinated. Essentially, they were forced to dig a trench, stand up beside it, and were shot. We don't have to do that anymore. We can just use the algorithm. So I think we really need to look honestly at why we believe what we believe. So the cognitive dissonance of that maybe we can't always trust the experts just makes us insane. We need to live in a society where we can trust the experts, where we can trust our journalists. And the left has this, I think the left and the right have kind of become interchangeable in a way, because what's happening is the working class is rebelling and challenging the status quo. Now we're trying to put them in their place, but they've weaponized. Why is Trump in power? Maybe the question we shouldn't be asking is not why Trump is in power, but how is it that the left failed so catastrophically, gaslighting and lying to people with such reckless disregard for basic facts that anybody could figure out. If you look at our world in data, you can clearly see. And if you look at your own children, so many people saw their own children get COVID and recover, going, this is not really a big deal for kids. And that's factually, statistically, scientifically, absolutely true. But yet if you stated that, you would lose your job. So those are problems that we can't figure out in our heads without becoming highly anxious, at least for me anyways, as someone who has a deep respect for institutions like the CBC and the universities that I've attended. But what I saw happening is something so catastrophically tragic, because here we are at a stage in civilization development where we are potentially facing some serious changes from things like climate change. And we do need to have a greater participation for the working class in the political landscape. You know, when we were forced young men to take a allegedly needed medical intervention, a vaccine. I mean, this is a vaccine unlike any other that we've ever used. Reprograms your cells to produce a spike protein. That's what it does. It's almost like a recipe for autoimmune disorders, which we have seen a great spike in. But we forced young men who wouldn't be troubled from COVID, who had already had it and gotten over it. We said, you will lose your job if we do that. And then many of those men went on to develop minor or serious heart problems. I know someone, and myself, like I developed heart problems back in the early 2000s, but at post-COVID, as one would expect with a spike protein that binds to ACE2, you're going to produce vascular inflammation and even neurological symptoms, you know, brain fog, etc. So we just dismissed these people and told them to shut up and follow the science. And anytime they brought up any reasonable argument, we said, well, your experts don't count. That man is motivated. And so no wonder Joe Rogan took over where journalism left off. We are now in a counter-revolutionary society where new parallel economies and governments are forming. And that could result in something even more devastating. In a war of ideas, it could result in an actual physical one. Because if we can't converse, if we can't have dialogue with one another, if we're so algorithmically separated that we can't communicate, that, like, as I say, cognitive dissonance has been weaponized, then we may in fact collapse.